Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is officially 1 month old, and now that I have finally beaten Promised Consort Radahn, I have officially beaten the Elden Ring DLC. Now that I have had a full playthrough of the DLC, I'll have to say that it is one of the best DLCs that I have ever played, not just for any Souls game, but for gaming in general. They designed the DLC almost perfectly in my opinion. The gameplay is very similar to Elden Ring style, which is great. They didn't change it up at all. And as usual, the visuals are superb and the music is godly, which is what you'd expect from a DLC for a cinematic masterpiece of a game that won Game of the Year in 2022. But despite how much I might glaze the DLC, there are certainly some flaws, some major ones and some minor ones that I have to address. But we'll save all the negativity for later and start off with some good old-fashioned positive comments. The DLC is fucking ginormous. It's like playing a whole new game with the amount of content in the DLC, and that too, it's pretty cheap at only $40. I'd argue that if you're a person who hasn't played any Souls-like games and you're looking to get into that genre of games, buying the Elden Ring bundle on Steam for $80 would be worth your money. As long as you immerse yourself in the gameplay, all the visuals, and the lore, you're going to enjoy this game. There's just so much to do, and that's kinda why the DLC took me about a month's worth of time to complete. You're never really gonna get bored as long as there is something to do, whether it's trying to upgrade your Erdtree level, or fight the dozens of new bosses in the game, or just explore the new Shadow Realm. With that being said, let's talk about the actual contents of the DLC. You start in this little area called Graveside Plains, and what I found very intriguing about this area is that it's very similar to Limgrave in a sense. You enter this area and there's this challenging mini boss that you can choose to fight or avoid, and in Limgrave it was the Tree Sentinel, and in the Graveside Plains it was the Furnace Golem. But the first positive that I have for this DLC isn't just continuity or how there's semi-resemblance in the structure of the two starting locations. The first plus that I have for this DLC is that you already take notice of a large chunk of the future DLC in that area, that being Shadowkeep. Shadowkeep is probably the largest sort of building or structure in the game, and it just pictorializes and gives you a massive idea as to how colossal the DLC is and how amazing it's going to be. I remember first stepping foot in the DLC and seeing a massive imposing black tower and just being in awe because I know that I'm going to be in that tower in a few days. Not only that, it's just a magnificent visual spectacle, and I will say that they did an amazing job with the overall design of this DLC. Now that we're done with all the obvious compliments, I would like to point out some notable bosses from the DLC and talk about them a bit further. Much like the base game, the DLC comes with its own set of unique bosses, lore for these bosses, new items, all things that, everyone expected, obviously. The first boss that I wanted to talk about is the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, which for most people will be the first major boss that you will fight in the Elden Ring DLC. Now there is so much that is excellent with this boss, and most notably, it's the visuals. The fact that this guy is like the master of elements and he just rotates between each one is just incredible. It's almost orgasmic in a sense, but that's not the only thing that makes my tummy tingle from this boss fight. The soundtrack for the Dancing Lion is just phenomenal. Like the fact that the main chorus plays the moment he activates his first element is just bonkers. And it looks like as if he's dancing to the music, right? Which I thought was symbolic as fuck. No OST in the DLC comes close to the Divine Beast Dancing Lion's OST. Well, maybe except Radahn's OST, but still, the Dancing Lion's OST is really good. Now, another boss I wanted to talk about is Mesmer the Impaler, the poster boy for the DLC. Mesmer, plain and simple, lived up to the hype 100%. When they first showcased him in that one trailer, I got out of my chair and was ecstatic over how badass he is. His design is just wonderful, the visuals are great, and he's damn near the perfect boss in Elden Ring. His fight is stellar as well, and I think it's very well choreographed, and the way he's introduced into the game when you walk into Mesmer's dark chamber during that cutscene, I thought it was spectacular and establishes a very great scene preparing for a very great fight. Now the final boss that I wanted to talk about, and this boss might be a top 5 boss in the game for me, is Bale the Dread. He's basically this giant Godzilla-like dragon creature, and in my opinion, he's the best dragon fight probably of all time. Now granted, I have not played that many Souls games or just games with dragons for that matter, so my experience when it comes to dragon fights is certainly lackluster. But still, from what I've experienced and from what I've seen on YouTube from other people fighting Bale and their experiences, it's safe to say that it's the best dragon fight of all time. I mean, this fight is something you'd expect from some fucking Godzilla fight simulator type shit. Like, I did not expect the fight to be this cinematic and action-packed, and synonymous with literally everything in this DLC down to like the last detail. The visuals are just astonishing. They put so much effort into perfecting the visual and mechanical quality of this game that there's basically nothing wrong with it. I can't find anything feasibly wrong with the visual and mechanical quality of this game. Like, this is the highest quality DLC I have ever seen, and it will most likely remain that way for quite some time. Now, I did mention in the beginning of the video that I would save the negativity for the end, so I guess I'll just get right into it. The DLC has massive performance problems for PC that even I have experienced despite having a fucking Goliath tank of a PC. There would be moments that my frames would go from a smooth and sexy 60 FPS to the most unbearable, gut-wrenching 6 frames per second. Some examples, at least from my experiences, include the entrance into Castle Ensis, various parts of Shadowkeep, and the overall location of the ancient ruins of Rua. Now, most likely, the plummeting of the frame rate has something to do with the amount of entities and scenery that my computer has to render, but at the same time, an RTX 4090 should have zero trouble, or like just literally no difficulty rendering any scene in Elden Ring. Aside from that, I could only imagine the struggle that lower end PCs would have trying to render everything in this game. Like I said in the pros section of this video, the DLC is fucking ginormous, not just in content, but in the amount your PC has to render. Now, performance issues don't stop there. I really wish they did, but unfortunately they never do now, don't they? Believe it or not, there are performance issues in boss fights, which is probably the worst thing that can possibly happen. Frame rate drop-offs in a game with combat as fast-paced as Elden Ring can get you killed. It's like the difference between life and death type of shit, and it can definitely throw you off when it occurs. Most of the frame rate drop-offs for me were in boss fights that were significantly performance demanding. A notable example for me was the Divine Beast dancing line. Now, I did mention this before, but this is one of the most well choreographed and spectacular fights in the entire DLC. It does make a little bit of sense why the FPS would drop a little bit, but not to the degree of it freeze framing and me nearly dying as a result. Like, what's crazy is that the dancing line is not the only boss, however, that has this issue. Believe it or not, I actually had a few issues with the final boss of the DLC, Promised Consort Radahn, or Radahn Consort of Miquella, however you want to interpret it. Like the dancing lion, this fight is incredible visually, but there were a couple of times where my game would freeze for half a second, allowing Radahn to get an extra hit or two off. Now, you could argue that I was probably gonna die that round anyway since Radahn took me 117 attempts, but I just figured that I would point that out since quite a few PC players had performance issues. As of right now, I'm not too sure whether or not the performance issues for PC have been addressed because I don't really check the patch notes or the change logs all that often, but if they have, then that is wonderful. If they haven't, then oh well, what can you do? Now, a minor issue that I have that is really nitpicky, so you don't really have to take it seriously, is the reward system for the bosses of the game. This is something that only I, as a rabid mathematical connoisseur, have a slight issue with. What I'm referring to is that the Shadow Realm bosses give an unjustifiably low amount of runes compared to their Lands Between counterparts. Some good examples of this include the Divine Beast Dancing Line, Rilana Twin Moon Knight, and the Golden Hippopotamus. Now let's take the Dancing Lion for example. How many runes do you think the Dancing Lion drops? Maybe 250k, 300k, maybe 400k for being generous? I mean, this is the DLC we're talking about, right? It's supposed to be like the end game sort of location, end game bosses, right? Well, the answer is none of them. It is a pitiful 135,000 runes on New Game Plus 3 difficulty. 135k runes is an astonishingly low amount of runes for a pretty difficult first boss, at least way harder than what Margit was, that's for sure. Now, to put things into great perspective as to how low the rewards are, here are some bosses from the base game that I found significantly easier than the Dancing Lion, that give almost a similar amount or just flat out more runes than the Dancing Lion. Now, I didn't want to talk about this next subject because this is one of the more controversial aspects of the DLC, but I figured since I've actually managed to beat the DLC despite using summons obviously, and considering that this is like a final video regarding the DLC, I might as well give my thoughts and opinions on whether or not the DLC is quote-unquote too hard. And my final answer is, it's not hard, if you do the right things. Like many Tarnished out there, I'm a firm believer in the Elden Ring DLC being too hard only if you make it hard on yourself. There are several mechanics in the game that make the game substantially easier. For example, the mechanic that I damn near always used for the DLC, summons, is probably the best feature that you could use to your advantage in the DLC. There are some broken summons out there, specifically the Mimic tier, that the developers at From Software encourage you to use. In addition, there are various other NPC summons that exist to help you, such as Redmane Freya for the Dancing Lion and Needle Knight Letta for Rellana, right? There is a reason the developers put these NPC summons there in the first place. It's to help you. Using a summon does not give you a broken Goku Super Saiyan power-up or something and allow you to one-shot the boss. No, that's not what it does at all. I use summons all the time to make my life easier and to reduce a bit of tension I have during fights. I don't bash players who use summons, nor do I bash players who don't use summons if they are capable of beating the game without them. Now, if you choose to neglect the summon mechanic and opt to ride solo, there is another set of mechanics that a lot of baby ragers forgot about 3 hours into the DLC, and those are the Erdtree Blessing and the Revered Spirit Ash Blessing mechanics. The Erdtree Blessing mechanic is pretty simple. You collect these little things called Erdtree fragments that are scattered throughout the map, and you use them to improve your defensive and offensive capabilities in the Shadow Realm. In essence, it's a very simple mechanic. The Revered Spirit Ash Blessing works in a similar way. You collect these things called Revered Spirit Ashes, which are scattered throughout the map, and you use them to buff the defensive and offensive capabilities of your summons. Now, did you notice something similar about the definitions of both blessings? Yeah, it's that you have to explore the damn map in order to get them. Go explore the game. Don't just stick to the main questline because you want to speedrun it and then complain when you die over and over again and things aren't going your way. Go explore, go collect the necessary items, beat the other side bosses such as Commander Gaius and Midra, and then come back for Radahn. The crazy thing is, I made the same drastic mistake with Radahn that cost me hours in the fight. My Erdtree level when I first fought Radahn was level 7, and that is just not going to cut it at all. I take it that most of the people complaining about the game being unnecessarily difficult also fell down the same rabbit hole of just being underleveled and not being prepared for the fight. The crazy thing is, I kept on getting the middle finger shoved up my butthole every time I fought Radahn with Erdtree level 7. Like, I just die in 3 to 4 hits. The fights would last 15 to 20 seconds. Like, these weren't even fights. They were fucking massacres. However, the second I upgraded my Erdtree level to level 17 and also got the Golden Braid, I was able to tank more of Radahn's hits and deal more damage. It's not that the boss is too powerful. It's just that you're too weak. You need to explore the DLC just like how you explored the vast contents of the base game. Now, going on a bit of a tangent here, I wanted to address another bit of reasoning on why the quote-unquote Elden Ring DLC is unnecessarily difficult narrative is just a big farce, and that is the requirements for the DLC itself. Do you know what requirements you need in order to unlock the DLC in the first place? Because you don't just get to teleport to the Shadow Realm using Sasuke's Rinnegan or something. In order to unlock the DLC, you have to beat Star Scourge Radahn and Mohg, Lord of Blood, two of the hardest bosses in the game, in the base game at least. Star Scourge Radahn, albeit post-Patrodon, is still very difficult early game, and Mohg, Lord of Blood, has an entire fucking area underground called the Mohgwyn Dynasty Mausoleum. The dude is like the only boss in that area, and like the area is dedicated to him. You have a whole questline, Var's questline, that's dedicated to Mohg, and he's one of the endgame bosses as well. Like, he's up there with Radagon and millennia for endgame bosses. He's tough, along with Radahn. If you fight 2 difficult bosses to unlock the DLC, why the fuck would the DLC be easy? It makes no logical sense whatsoever. Why would the developers scale down the difficulty when you've already proven that you could beat 2 challenging bosses? It's like this basic logic goes over the heads or in one ear out the other type of shit for some of these review bombers. Basic common sense and the ability to recognize one's own mistake is just being completely thrown out the window in regards to this DLC. People complain to turn down the difficulty because their cheesy builds don't work anymore and they actually have to learn to dodge the boss's attacks and get better. Now then again, I'll admit, when I first started playing the Elden Ring DLC, I sucked. I didn't understand the DLC all that much, but over the past month-ish of gaining experience, I've learned the mechanics for the most part, and I've beaten the final boss of the game. In essence, that is what makes Souls games so incredible. You learn the mechanics through trial and error and succeed at the end. One of the biggest selling points of Souls games is that you're allowed to learn from your mistakes and get unlimited chances to succeed. Now, unfortunately, if none of my reasoning struck a chord deep in your heart, then I'm truly sorry. If you're complaining about such a great game just because you can't beat it despite not even using significant features that the game developers offer you, I wonder if you're ever going to beat the game. Even a player like myself, who played the DLC so poorly when it first came out, was able to learn almost all of the mechanics necessary to beat the game. And I did beat the game as a result. I was an Elden Ring noob, but rather than quitting because it was too hard, I got better, and there is truly nothing better than getting better. I have no doubt in my mind that during my rerun of the Elden Ring DLC, which I'm currently doing as of making this video, it will be way easier than when I first started. As a matter of fact, during my rerun of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, I managed to beat Mesmer without summons. Now, if you know me, I am fond of using summons to make the game as fun for me as possible and also sort of take tension off of me at times during boss fights, right? But the crazy thing is not the fact that I beat Mesmer without summons, it's actually the fact that I beat Mesmer on my first try on New Game Plus for difficulty. Entering the fight, I was Scadutree level 18 as opposed to like level 6 or 7, and I had previous experience with Mesmer and his moveset. Believe it or not, that's kind of the whole point of Souls games, to learn from your mistakes and get better. Learn which builds suit your playstyle, use the mechanics in the game, learn the boss's movesets. All these things contribute to a satisfying and memorable gaming experience, and that is what I have truly received from Elden Ring.